Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, my name is Gena and I make videos about houseplants and houseplant related content. So if that sounds interesting to you, you should hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. In today's video, we're going to take a look at my Rhipsalis collection, also known as the Jungle Cactus. So I've been collecting my Rhipsalis for, well, I got my first Rhipsalis about 2 years ago, and it took a while for it to really start getting that crazy growth pattern that I love. But then once it did, I was like, I need more. So I added quite a few Rhipsalis to my collection just this past year. So some of the Rhipsalis in my collection I was able to find locally, but most of them I did have to order online. But because, you know, it can get expensive purchasing plants online, and I had read that they're really good propagators. So just from cuttings, they can grow really well. So I decided, I found a seller on Etsy who sells just cuttings of Rhipsalis, and I was able to add, I think, maybe like 6 different cuttings to my collection. And they've done really, really well for me. And we'll talk more about that later. So in this video, I will be showing you my entire collection, and then I will share with you my experience with these plants, what I've done to make them do this, which is absolutely fabulous in my opinion. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll want to add a few Rhipsalis to your collection. This is my very first Rhipsalis I ever got, and I just love it. This is, my favorite thing about them is that they really have a mind of their own. They start out growing tall like this, and then they flop over and they become this, and they're such free spirit plants, and I just love that about them. If I was going to be a plant, I would want to be a Rhipsalis, just carefree and just so fun. All right, so I keep my Rhipsalis all in one location, which is over here, and they sit on a shelf in my dining room. And I love keeping them all together, my little collection all together. So we're gonna walk over there and I'm gonna introduce you to all of them. All right, so this here is my entire Rhipsalis collection. And it's a combination of plants that I purchased online and plants that I found locally. And I have a total of 12 Rhipsalis plants in my collection. So we're going to go through each one. But before we do that, I want to point out, and something that you may notice here, is that every single one of these is in terracotta. And I have found that terracotta seems to work the best for these guys because they do like to dry out, because they are epiphytic, I think that's the word, epiphytes. They're epiphytes, which means that they grow on other things. They'll grow on trees. They'll grow along like on rocks. So they don't want a soggy soil. So I have potted these guys in terracotta, and then they're in a chunky soil mix. So it's really fast draining, and I guess we'll go into the watering needs of these guys first. So they do, like I said, they want to dry out between waterings, and in my experience during the summer and right now in the fall winter season, I am watering these guys once a week. And the way that I tell if they need watering is you could stick your finger in the soil, and if like the top inch or two is dry, you can go ahead and water them. But personally, I like to use my moisture meter because it's just easier for me. Or I'll just take the pot and I'll just see how it feels. I can kind of gauge if it needs water by the weight of the pot. This one, not quite yet. It could go another couple days. But yeah, that's a nice way to see if they need to be watered. So when it comes to water, the most important thing to remember is to not let them sit in a wet soil for too long. You want that water to drain right through. So what I do is I take the pot and I will water until it starts draining out of the pot, so I know that it got really nice and saturated. And that lasts me for about a week. So the next thing that we'll talk about is lighting for these plants. And hopefully you can see it. This is a pretty bright area. So over here, let me just swing this camera for you guys. We have a southwest facing window, and it gives these plants a really nice amount of light. And then over here, we'll just kind of swing this way, we have my Millsbow cabinet, and they get a little bit of the grow light from that. And then down here, I have more grow lights for some plants that are down underneath here, so they are getting some benefit from that, from their lower stems. I have thought about giving them some grow lights above here and above here, but they seem to be doing just fine with this bright indirect light. Maybe it's more like a medium indirect light, medium light. I don't know. I have a hard time figuring out what's bright indirect light, what's medium indirect light. So one thing I've learned is that you don't really want to give them direct sunlight because it will change the color of their foliage. So like here, so down here, this plant, a few of these plants are pretty close to this grow light underneath the shelf. And I've noticed, and I'll pick this up and bring it to you so you can see, but the stems, can you see how they've changed color? Kind of an orangish red shade. And that's from being so close to those grow lights. And that's what would happen if you were to put these guys in direct sun. So that's not something you want to do. So after seeing how these plants are reacting to this grow light, that's another reason why I don't want to add grow lights to the tops of the plants. I mean, they're growing just fine the way they are. So I think, I don't need them to grow super fast. And this is interesting over here. So this plant, which is close to the Millsbow cabinet here, you can see how it's reacting to the added extra light from the grow lights in the cabinet. So, if I were to add grow lights above these, they probably would grow a lot faster. And but like I said, I'm fine with the way they're growing now, and they seem to be happy just as they are. And I'm happy just as they are. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is humidity. So now, as I said, these are called the jungle cactus because they do live in the jungle, which is quite humid, so they would benefit from some extra humidity. So I live in Colorado, a long ways from the jungle. We are pretty dry here. My house humidity is around 30–40%, and I have found that these guys don't really seem to be affected too much by that low humidity. They don't get brown tips or anything like that. The only thing is, if I were to add some extra humidity for them, I bet they would explode with growth. But if you're able to keep your home in the 30 to 40% range for humidity, these guys are going to be just fine. So even though they may want humidity, I shouldn't say they want it. Even though they may really enjoy it and would be happy to have it, they don't necessarily need it to survive and thrive, because mine are thriving and they're surviving just fine without added humidity. So the final care thing I would like to talk about would be feeding or fertilizing your plants. So these guys don't need a lot of fertilizer from what I've read. I personally, like every 2 weeks, I'll give them some sort of plant fertilizer, and they're growing just fine. We've got lots of new growth on these plants, and that seems to be working out just fine. So you don't want to over fertilize these guys, because the salts do build up in them, and then you could run into problems with that. So it's best to, once a month, every couple of weeks, once a month, add them to your feeding schedule. So one other great thing about these plants is they are non-toxic to humans and to our furry little buddies here. So if your cats or your dogs do get into these plants, they're not going to be poisoned by them. And in fact, one neat little thing about these guys is they do produce fruit or berries, which is what these white things are. And they are edible. And I've read that they're a real sweet tasting berry. I'm not interested in trying them out, but it's good to know that if I needed to eat them, I could. I don't know why I would, but. All right, so I think that is everything I wanted to cover. And now we can get into actually seeing these plants and learning the names of them and showing you a little more up close of what they look like. But before we do that, there was one more thing I wanted to mention when I was talking about humidity. If you do decide that you want to add some extra humidity for these guys to get that added growth, I do have a link for a humidifier, one that I use and really enjoy, and it's working out really well for me. I have a link, and I'll put it in the description. It's for, I believe, 50% off this humidifier. So, if you're in the market for a humidifier, it might be worth checking it out. All right, so I think we're gonna start right over here. And this one was a plant that I was able to find locally. And this is my Rhipsalis ewaldiana. And this is the one that you can see how kind of lopsided the growth is on this guy. Because it's getting that extra light from the Millsbo cabinet and it's growing towards it. And isn't this just fabulous? These plants just make me smile, because I love their craziness, and they're just so cool. So that's the Rhipsalis ewaldiana. All right, so this next one, we have the Rhipsalis sulcata. And this is one that currently does have some berries. And you can see now when it has lighter growth, that's the newer growth. So this, I don't know if it picks up on the camera, but this is the lighter growth and the newer growth on this plant. And this is one that I believe, pretty sure this is one I got a cutting of. And it rooted up just fine for me. And for some of these, I do have video of when I first got them. So you can see what they look like when I first got them, when I first opened them from the package, and to see how much growth we've gotten out of them. So this is Rhipsalis sulcata. All right, so this next one, this is definitely one I know that I picked up on Etsy, and it was just cuttings, and this is Rhipsalis capilliformis. And it's another one that has some fun, crazy growth on it. Very pretty. And this one, I don't think I had any trouble with rooting this one. And there were a couple that I did have issues with, and when we get to them, I'll let you know. But for the most part, it was so easy to root these guys just from cuttings. All right, so the next one we're looking at is the Campos Portuana. And this one, gosh, I don't know, I have to get on my tippy toes here to show you its growth. Its newest growth is down here. And this is another one that we're getting another shoot even off of here that's gonna branch out. The branching is pretty cool on these. And as I said before, they start out coming up tall here, and then they flop over, and then they just start doing this little deal here. So, and this one also rooted up just fine from a cutting. So that's the Campos Portuana. All right, so this next one we're looking at is a really difficult to pronounce name. And of course the names will be up on the screen, so even though I'm butchering them, you can still see what their names really are. So this one is the Mesembryanthemioides. I know I butchered that. This is a different one. It doesn't quite have the same kind of wild growth pattern to it. Here's some new growth here that will eventually get these little doohickeys. I don't know what you call them. And this was from a cutting, and also it rooted up pretty easily. So, name. All right, so our next one we're looking at is the Rhipsalis bassifera. This one actually has a berry as well. So what they do is they flower first and then the berries form. Oh, it's got a flower or a berry up here too. So this one has 2 berries. Now this one is very long. This was a cutting as well. And this was one of the ones that gave me some trouble with trying to get it rooted. So I would stick these stems into the soil. Well, here you can see how it looked when I first got it. There were a lot of cuttings. So I stuck them into the soil, and one by one they just would start rotting here. So I had to pull them out, and then I would chop them and then put them back into the soil, and again they would start to rot, so I would try that again. So finally I decided, and I'll show you, I cut those strands and I put them, I'm water rooting them. And these guys have actually been in this water for a while. You can see the roots. They have a very fine root system. So probably soon I need to stick these back into this pot and we'll try it that way. But these are little water propagations of this one, the Rhipsalis bassifera. All right, so the next one we're going to take a look at is this gorgeous Rhipsalis paradoxa. And this is one I was able to find locally. And it was actually 2 plugs of this plant. And I could propagate this and fill up this pot, but I don't know, I like the way it kind of looks how it is, so I'm not like anxious to make a bigger pot of this. I think it's just cute as it is. Neat little segments. This one has kind of spiral segments, and that's Rhipsalis paradoxa. And the next one we're going to take a look at is the Rhipsalis pilocarpa. And I can't remember if I ordered this one. I think I got this one locally as well. And this one is it's kind of a slower grower. But my very first Rhipsalis I ever got was also pretty slow growing, and then suddenly it just kind of went wild. And I think this one's very similar to that. I think soon this one's going to start taking off. This one has some neat foliage on it, kind of hairy, and it does this fun little branching. Love it. That's the Rhipsalis pilocarpa. And this next one is kind of similar to the Paradoxa, how it grows, its growth pattern. This is the Rhipsalis micrantha. And when I first got this one, I thought this was the pilocarpa because when I picked it up locally, this was also a local pickup. I asked for the Paradoxa and they brought me the micrantha. But, you know, I didn't know the difference between them at that point, so I just went about life thinking this was the Paradoxa. But in fact, it's not. It's the micrantha. It also has the segments, and it's also very cute. And it's also not a super fast grower, which is just fine. It's still very cute. Rhipsalis micrantha. All right, so now we're gonna look at, I would say this is my very favorite Rhipsalis because of how wacky it is, but it's also my very first Rhipsalis, so it has a special place in my heart for sure. And I've had this one for about 2 years now. And it started out with just, see how the top is here, very short, just like a little bit of grass in the pot. And then one day it shot up some strands like this. And then those strands toppled over and then it just started branching everywhere. And I just love it. This is what just won my heart and got me into Rhipsalis. And as far as the name, so when I bought this, it was just labeled as Rhipsalis SP, so I didn't know, I still don't know exactly what type this one is. When I'm looking online and comparing how it looks to those online, I think it might be the Rhipsalis cerascula, but I don't know for sure. But it doesn't matter. I just love it. So cute. All right, so this next one is a little bit different. It looks totally different than all the other Rhipsalis. And this is the Rhipsalis pachyptera, I believe is how you pronounce it. And this one, I would say, is super duper slow growing. And it actually, when I first got, this was a cutting, and I actually got 2 of them, and one just, I couldn't get it to root. So I finally just gave up on it. And this one, I mean, I feel resistance, so I know it's rooted, but it's just not growing. It's just not doing anything. But it is cute. I mean, maybe some of these here are little new growth tips. Looks like it might have had a little flower actually at the top. But that's the Rhipsalis pachyptera. And then finally, another one that's real similar with its growth pattern, and this is the Rhipsalis platycarpa. It's unusual. Very thick leaves on this one, very succulent feeling leaves. And this one has grown for me. All of this is new here. But again, pretty slow growing, but definitely very cool looking. That's Rhipsalis platycarpa. So if you do decide to add some Rhipsalis to your collection, don't be afraid to go the cutting route like I did. I had a lot of success with it, as you can see, and I'm going to include some video here of how I potted these when I first got them. So it was recommended by the seller that we pot them up right away, and they recommended potting them right into soil. You can certainly start them out in water to get those water roots, but it really isn't necessary. So what I did was, so when you do propagate these, you're going to cut them and you want them to harden like overnight to get that callus on them, so that when you do plant them, they don't get rot on them. So you do that, and then I got my soil ready, and then I had some rooting hormone, which they suggested doing this, just dipping your stem cuttings into the rooting hormone before you put them into your pot, which is what I did. And then you want to make sure that soil doesn't dry out. You want to keep that soil pretty wet for a few weeks until you know that these guys are rooted. And that's really all there is to it. It's really very simple. So I'm going to include a link to the seller I went through for my cuttings. I believe I did get 6 cuttings, and I think they gave me 1 freebie also. And it was a pretty good deal. And it's a great way to really get your collection going. And I just adore my collection. This is definitely one of my happy places in my house, right here. I just come in here and I just look at them and I just love them. So they are very joyful, fun, free-spirited, happy plants. So I hope you enjoyed learning about my Rhipsalis. And I hope maybe you might add some to your collection. Let me know in the comments below if you think you might get into some Rhipsalis. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love for you to be a part of this community. So hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.